East meets West, the issue of patience is often central. A group of Chinese and American economists are getting together to study economic change in China. They hope to offer important information to anyone willing to listen. The group announced its plans in a news conference today, reminding people that China has a long history and urging us not to get bogged down in the political problems of today at the expense of the future. Steve Davis reports.
Economic reform in China has to do with the livelihood of more than 1 billion people in China. Furthermore, the success or failure of economic reform will have tremendous impact on the Asia-Pacific region, not only to Hong Kong, to Taiwan, to all the Far East and Southeast Asia countries, but also in China's future relationship with the United States.
And so a group of scholars, most of them economists, has formed the 1990 Institute to study and report upon China's 10-year effort at economic reform.
After June 4th, that we have sort of conflicting forces, that we wonder what we do with China. Pro-sanction, against sanction, so on and so forth. We just consume the energy at each other. And my feeling is this is the project will channel the energy, unify them, and move forward.
The long-term solutions of China's problems can only come about with understanding.
This Project 1990 will be non-political and non-partisan.
Still, other nations, particularly Japan and Korea, have adopted political policies which allow them to step into the economic cavity created by international reaction to China's recent suffocation of internal dissent. Surely this group hopes that successful Chinese economic reform will lead to political reform.
I'm not going to comment on that. I think the whole approach of this institute and the Project 1990, I must say it's very oriental. We just let nature take its course.
It's politically difficult for this nation to display an interest in economic relations with China, following the violent repression we all watched occur in Tiananmen Square last year. But it also may be economically disastrous to isolate ourselves from a nation whose people represent 1/4 of the world's population. It's a concern that certainly is not lost upon the participants in Project 1990. In San Francisco, Steve Davis, Channel 7 News.
第一間由中國同美國學者組成嘅中國問題研究中心，今日宣布喺三藩市成立。第一個計劃係研究中國嘅經濟改革。徐偉娟報導。
90學社 1990 Institute 由20幾個關注中國問題嘅中外人士組成，包括幾個以前參與中國體制改革嘅研究員。美國聯邦儲備銀行為佢哋提供開會嘅地點同埋工作人員。主席沈堅白話：學社成立目的係研究中國社會同經濟問題，並且將研究結果公佈，同埋喺世界各地展開公開討論。
做非常公正的、客觀的研究工作，尤其是關於經濟方面的，關於社會方面的，可是我們不干預政治。
但佢強調學社係獨立，絕對唔牽涉政治，亦都唔會主動同中國大陸政府接觸。不過佢哋會返中國做研究同埋攞資料。一向研究國際問題嘅程航生係90學社社長。佢話：佢相信佢哋將來嘅研究結果會係客觀同埋有用。佢希望亦都歡迎中國官員參考佢哋嘅研究結果。
我們不預備直接跟他們去提出來啊！他們如果對我們研究的結果有興趣，他們要來跟我們商量討論，那我們很歡迎。
佢又相信呢啲長期研究工作會對中國嘅發展有幫助。程航生話：中國現時最急切嘅問題係經濟改革，所以佢哋學社首先會研究呢一個問題。90學社預料第一年經費大約係25萬，佢哋遲啲會舉辦一連串嘅籌款活動。 26台記者徐慧娟報導。
Gentlemen, and good morning. We thank you for taking your time to come over to this press conference. My name is C.B.Sung. I'm chairman of the Unison Group. For this particular occasion, I serve as a volunteer to this 1990 Research Institute, in short, 1990 Institute. My role is chairman of the 1990 Institute. On my right is Dr. Hangsheng Cheng. Dr. Cheng is the Vice President of International Studies of the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. For this occasion, he serves as a volunteer as president of the 1990 Institute. On your right is Dr. Jack Beebe. He's the first vice president of the Federal Reserve Bank, senior vice president of the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. And he represents a bank who's a co-sponsor of the Project 1990. Now, each of us will speak for less than 10 minutes, so that we'll give you plenty of time to ask questions.
Mr. Beebe, how do you spell your name? B-E-E-B-E.
Yeah, it is in the press release kit.
I couldn't find it.
First, let me talk about the background. In early December, I happened to have a meeting at the Federal Reserve Bank, and it was the first time I met Dr. Hangsheng Cheng, although I have heard of his name a long time ago. And after that meeting, he briefed me his ideas of starting a project, which he actually has worked on since July 1989. And this particular project would assemble a group of prominent economists in America, and many of them are Chinese Americans, and working with a group of Chinese scholars, Chinese economists, who happen to be here prior to June 1989, and they're scattered in this country doing research work. And the idea is to study the 10-year reform experience of China, to understand the successes as well as failures, and hope to map out a guide for future reform, continuing reform of China, in China. And I was very impressed by this idea, and I immediately support this project, and for the following reasons. First of all, Dr. Cheng as an individual who has had solid accomplishment, a solid reputation in his integrity and his dedication to this project. Second, as you know, after June 4th, that we have sort of a conflicting forces, that we wonder what we do with China. Pro-sanction, against sanction, so on and so forth. We just consume the energy of each other. And my feeling is this is the project will channel the energy, unify them, and move forward. And this is my second reason. The third reason is with what's happening in Eastern Europe, in Soviet Union, in South Africa, in Central America, we virtually forget about China, which is 1/4 of the population of the world. So this, in my opinion, is a way to put China back on the map in the most positive way. And in addition, this particular project, in our opinion, not only will understand the reform of China, the success, which I think as a whole of the 10-year period, the net is a success, and the mapping out for future reform, but it also paves the way for the Eastern European countries, for Soviet Union to understand that. And I think this truly has a significance for the overall, for the world as a whole. And we have finally chosen to name this Institute 1990, because 1990 represents a very exciting decade. And we have 1992 ahead of us, we have 1997 ahead of us. And this is the reason why we have chosen this name. And this project, 1990, will take about 2 years, but it is not a research project, will be done within the closed door. We will intend to sponsor forums, to have an exchange with those who are interested, those who care about this project. One thing, however, we want to emphasize, this Project 1990 will be non-political and non-partisan. And we want to keep the independence of our thinking, our thoughts. And this think tank approach is based on this concept. We're elated over the support. We have, when we started, the organizing committee is only 5 people. In a matter of few months, we have over 50 people in the organizing committee. And we met over the weekends and in the evenings. And we have a list of very prominent people who have agreed to serve as an honorary co-chairman, and I would just mention a few of them, such as former Undersecretary of State, Ambassador Philip Habib, and the president of Johns Hopkins University, Steve Miller, and president of Princeton University, Harold Shapiro, and Dr. T.Y. Ling, the famous structural engineer, T.Y. Ling International. And we are very honored to have Federal Reserve Bank as a co-sponsor of Project 1990. And we also have many Chinese organizations, Asian-oriented organizations, immediately support this project. They include the FF fraternity, a Chinese-American fraternity, the AAMA, Asian American Manufacturers Association, ABL, Asian Business League, and Hong Kong Association of Northern California, China Business Association, so on and so forth. And I just wanted to clarify one point in the press release. The press release says $250,000 budget for the first year. And actually, this budget is only primarily for out-of-pocket expenses, expenses to support some of the Chinese scholars. Most of the American economists, the Americans, volunteer for this project. So if you really want to know the total effort, then I would say the total budget is somewhere between 5 to 10 times of this number. And
thank you very much, C.B. I want to give you a very quick background about the Institute. As C.B. has mentioned, this is an organization that started completely from grassroots support. Individuals who are concerned about China, who are interested in China, and they refuse to accept the present negative mood about problems in China and look to the future about what are the long-run solutions of many complex problems facing China today, and not just today, for maybe the last couple of 100 years. These are the long-term problems that the Institute is set up to study, to find solutions to. I think this Institute is unique in 2 ways. First, it is, as far as we know, the only research institute that focuses on policy issues relating to China. There are many research institutes or public information in public interest institutes on China, scattered all over the country and maybe all over the world. But as far as we know, not one that's focused on policy issues. In other words, we want to combine scholarship, in-depth study, with policy relevance. This kind of combination is unique in the area of China studies. The second uniqueness of this institute is that it is a purely grassroots support institute. And there are many institutes in the world, but I don't know of a single one that is started in this way. It is completely started by individuals, individual donations, $1,000 here, $2,000 there. The largest donation we have is $10,000. This kind of bits and pieces from enthusiastic individuals is not, I think, it's unheard of. And it is, to me, a demonstration of the spirit of American volunteerism. President George Bush spoke of 1,000 lights. This is one of the lights that is lighting up the sky in San Francisco. We hope that will have effect on increasing knowledge of China. This brings me to the purpose and activities of the Institute. The purpose is twofold. Number one, research. Number two, public forums. Research, the purpose of research is to enhance knowledge, increase knowledge about fundamental issues relating to China. The purpose of public forums is to disseminate knowledge, because we believe that the long-term solutions of China's problems can only come about with understanding. Now, because knowledge is in public domain, governments in the United States or in foreign countries are free to use the knowledge or not to use the knowledge. It is up to them to decide whether the knowledge we will generate will be useful to them or not. It is not our function. I want to repeat. It is not the function of this institute to influence policy either in the United States or in any foreign countries. By articles of incorporation, the Institute is a non-profit, charitable, educational institution. The whole purpose is to generate and disseminate knowledge. It is not politically motivated. It is not a political action group. It is not a lobby group. It is a pure research institute to generate and disseminate knowledge. I want to emphasize this again and again so that there's no misunderstanding about the purpose and activities of this institute. And finally, I want to just expand on one more point, namely that this institute is starting with a single project, namely the economic reform of China, because we believe, all the supporters of this institute believe, that this project on in economic reform in China has to do with the livelihood of more than 1 billion people in China. Their future livelihood depends upon success of economic reform. Furthermore, the success or failure of economic reform will have tremendous impact on the Asia-Pacific region, not only to Hong Kong, to Taiwan, to all the Far East and Southeast Asia countries, but also in China's future relationship with the United States. This, to us, is tremendously important
project, and that is why the Institute decides to start out its research projects with this one. That also means that in future, once the Institute is firmly established and on its way, we will begin to consider other topics of tremendous importance to China's future. So it is not a one project institute. The institute will expand on the research activities into other areas, as well as in the lecture series that it will sponsor. The lecture series, again, let me emphasize, will be both scholarly and policy relevant, and related to fundamental issues on China. And I invite the news media to cover our future activities in the lecture series. Now, finally, just one word about the inaugural dinner. After this news conference, on Monday, April the 16th in the evening, the Institute will have its inaugural dinner to be held at Holiday Inn Crown Plaza in Burlingame. We'll start at 5:45 registration and no host cocktail, and 7 o'clock dinner. The dinner will have 2 featured keynote speakers. Professor Milton Friedman will speak on China's economy, and Professor Robert Scalopino will speak on China's foreign relations. So these already, you see, the Institute is gathering very prominent support in the United States, in academia, in the government agencies, in the universities, and in the general public. So we thank you for your coverage and hope you bring the news to the wider public. Thank you very much.
I'd like to just add a few words about this program and how it fits with other types of things we're doing. The Federal Reserve Bank is very, very pleased to co-sponsor Project 1990. In the form of co-sponsorship, we are not providing any funding for this program. What we are providing is some limited staff time, primarily that of Hangsheng Cheng, and the use of our conference rooms, and we certainly hope to co-sponsor and co-publish some of the working papers, particularly those related to central bank issues and issues of financial markets. As many scholars are familiar, this bank's Pacific Basin program has sponsored research on Pacific Basin countries for some time, at least 15 years. And its second goal, besides sponsoring research, is to foster cooperation among the region's central banks on issues that are common to all of these central banks. It turns out that this bank's direct interaction with China goes back to 1980. At that time, top-level visits began between the Federal Reserve System and the People's Bank of China, and that program was begun when the then president of our bank, John Wallace, and Hangsheng Cheng went as a 6-person delegation along with then Chairman Volcker of the Federal Reserve to pay a formal visit to the People's Bank of China. Since then, many, many visits back and forth have occurred at all levels. And since that time, 1980, the bank here has maintained a very strong interest in the economy of China, particularly because of what we believed the pivotal position it will have not only in Asia, but in the change that we're seeing worldwide from socialist or planned economies to more free enterprise economies. I think that this bank is sponsoring this program really for a couple of basic reasons. The project's objectives are very consistent with our own. That is, unbiased research which has the purpose of generating institutional and analytical knowledge about problems of primary concern, not only to the country involved, but more generally to other countries in similar situation. This project really has a potential for a very significant contribution toward our understanding of economic reform processes in socialist countries in general, and of course China in particular. Although China has a very, very different history than, say, the countries of Eastern Europe, I think at least 3 areas of social and political reform, economic reform, are common, and I could think of many more. But one would be the issues that are faced with monetary policy and controlling inflation during a reform process and afterward. Another is how one can get a price system working that allocates both wages and prices of goods in a way in which the flows of workers and products are efficient. And the third is generating a system in which incentives become private. We each have our own incentives, and secondarily, perhaps, the ownership of resources also is privatized to some degree. The purpose of the project also fits the plan of what our bank does, because the project is not designed to give advice to China or any other country, but to shed light on both the institutional and the analytical issues involved. Thank you.
So authorities at some point will use this information in order to further their reform efforts?
I would say, based on our past experience, the Chinese authorities have been very humble about these things, and whenever they see a good thing, they will try to adopt it. And therefore, we have reason to believe this kind of information, once it becomes available, we believe some of them will be adopted.
So what is the most serious problem the Chinese economy facing now, in your opinion?
Dr. Hansen?
Could you repeat it?
Yeah, what is the most serious problem the Chinese economy facing now, in your opinion?
This question, of course, is very broad. China faces a long list of problems, including population control and the political system adjustments. And but in our minds, the most important question is how to get back to economic reform so as to avoid the past pitfalls, such as inflation, such as because of the distribution system that gave rise to corruption. All these social and economic problems are related to an economy undergoing structural adjustments, fundamental changes, and it requires a tremendous amount of thinking through systematic analysis in order to get back to economic reform on the proper road. And in our minds, that is indeed the most important issue facing China today.
Any other questions?
Dr. Cheng, you emphasize very strongly that this is not to be a lobbying organization, that it is not intended the organization to impress policy upon the United States or China or anyone else. And yet, obviously, you intend for this information to be used by governments toward ends that your review would see as sound. So what's beyond simply telling us that you wish to disseminate information? There's a lot of subtlety in how that would happen. How would you like to see this information make its way into government policies?
Thank you for this question. It's really a very good and very important question. I think the best way to answer this question is to cite you a number of examples of research institutes of this kind. And the first one that comes to my mind is the National Bureau of Economic Research. It is a very prestigious institution in the United States that does basic fundamental research and related to policy issues, but does not advocate particular policy courses. And what policy courses will be taken, it is up to the governments. And another example that I think of, because I recently attended the dinner in honor of Professor Scalopino, is at the University of California in Berkeley, the Institute of East Asian Studies. They produce a lot of studies, sometimes relating on policies, on foreign relations. All these studies shed light on policy issues, but they do not try to push their views on any government. And I have worked in the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco for the last 16 years. We have published books, we have published articles on balance of payments policies, on exchange rate policies, on inflation, and pointing out the problems existing in many Pacific Basin countries. In none of these studies do we try to push a particular point of view. We're strictly analytical, factual, and presenting the results of our analysis. We do not advocate or push for lobby for changes. Changes are up to individual governments. The researcher's responsibility is to find out facts and the analysis of best ways to solve problems.
Yes. Do you have any specific other countries? Dr. Shen said earlier that he hoped this experience could be applied to other communist countries that are undergoing reform. Are there any specific countries that you had in mind? And given the different political situations and relations that the United States has with each of these countries, how would this one country's information be more broadly applied?
Well, all three of us have stated, we believe this kind of a reform history are applicable to virtually all socialistic countries, seeking, changing from controlled planned economy to market economy, or one might call it mixed economy. And that includes virtually all the Eastern European countries, as well as Soviet Union.
Mr. Sung, you made a remark earlier that you were particularly interested that the Soviet Union and East European nations should understand this, and I'm not sure what exactly you meant by that. Would you expand on that?
Well, I think the difference is the Chinese government preferred to start the whole reform process by economic reform, whereas the Soviet Union, I think, if I understand correctly, they went the other way. They started political reform first, and then hopefully the economic reform will follow. As a matter of fact, there's a gentleman here from a vice consul from Soviet consulate is here because he has heard about this project because the newspaper published, I think Chronicle has an article about this think tank, and he has taken his time to come over.
Should we infer then by that remark that you think that political reform will follow economic reform in China?
Again, this is not our choice. We let the nature take its course. And
do you believe that that's a likelihood?
Well, I'm not going to comment on that. I'm not going to comment on that. I think the whole approach of this institute and the Project 1990, I must say it's very Oriental. We just let nature take its course.
May I add a word or two? I think a couple of questions both relate to the implications for other socialist countries. Let me state two things. Number one, each country has its own history, tradition, institutional background. So each country must find a road that is most suitable for that country. That's number one. On the other hand, there are certain general principles of the market mechanism, of the social interaction. These general principles are widely applicable, not only to socialist countries trying to reform the economic system, but also in market economies such as the United States. That is why we economists, including myself, believe that solid research on basic principles will produce results not only applicable to one country, a single country in particular situation, but to make clear these general principles which can be applied creatively into different situations. It is from that point of view that we believe that lessons learned from China's economic reform will have general implications for other countries as well.
Yes, Frank?
Yeah, Mr. Sung, in your talks with Chinese officials, did you come away with the impression that the structural reform institutes that played such an important role in the Chinese economy before last June may be on the verge of playing an active role once again?
Could you repeat that? I didn't quite catch the whole thing.
In your talks with Chinese officials earlier this month, did you come away with the impression that the structural reform institutes to which many of these economists were attached might once again be on the verge of playing an important role in the management of the economy?
You mean those in China?
Yeah.
The institute itself.
Yes. Well, I think in China, the Reform Institute has always been very active, and to the best of my knowledge, they continue to be active. And I'm sure they would be very interested in seeing, hearing the results that we have to offer.
Mr. Cheng, you mentioned you are starting with a single project called Economic Reforms in China. Would you like to tell us more about this project?
The question has to do with the project, what we call Project 1990. This project consists of about 20 economists to start out with. Let me repeat, it's to start out with because it is an open project. We invite other economists to participate if they wish to. Of the 20 economists, 10, roughly 10, about 10 from the United States side, and 10 from the Chinese side. That is Chinese scholars who have had hands-on experience in the last 10 years in the designing of economic reform. They will bring to the project practical experience of the difficulties and the considerations used in designing the economic reform policies in the last 10 years. That kind of a practical experience is indispensable for the success of the research. On the U.S. side, we have 10 prominent U.S. economists who have made contributions to economics in various fields, including studies on China. These 10 economists bring to the project their experience in doing research, their training rigorous training in economic research. It is a combination of the economic expertise from the U.S. side and the practical experience from the Chinese scholar side. This kind of blending, I think it's unique, again unique. In the past, many large projects have been conducted, either in the United States or in China. I do not know of any single project that combines the two sides, working closely together over a long period, 2-year period, to produce a product that will combine the best of both sides.
Are those Chinese economists around here already?
I'm sorry?
Are those Chinese economists, they are here or not?
Yes. Thank you for asking the question. The 20 economists now are all in the United States. They are scattered in different parts of the United States. They are mostly in universities. The Chinese scholars are visiting scholars in the various universities, some in Princeton University, some now at University of Pennsylvania and University of Colorado. They are scattered all over the United States. And so are the American scholars. They are also in universities, in institutions such as the Rand Corporation, and I myself with the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. And the leader, the research director, will be Professor Walter Gadenson, a foremost, most prominent scholar who has retired recently, about 3 years ago, from Cornell University. He was the research director of a U.S. National Committee on the study of Chinese economy in the 60s, and he was, as I said, a prominent U.S. scholar who was excited about this idea of this special combination of talents. And he has agreed to come out of his retirement to lead the research project.
I assume that the Chinese nationalists among the scholars were all here prior to June.
I'm sorry?
The Chinese nationalists among the scholars were all here prior to June of '89.
Yes, I think, yes.
They have,
Yeah, right. In fact, they are all over the United States. As a matter of fact, I wanted to emphasize this is not just a San Francisco or Bay Area project, even though it started here. This is as far as we're concerned, it's a national project. And in fact, it may even be beyond that, because I was in Hong Kong, and some of the thoughtful people in Hong Kong wanted to hold a forum one of these days to exchange ideas in Hong Kong.
May I add to that? In fact, at the beginning of this institute, we have formed 11 committees. One of the committee is called Asia Pacific Committee, and its task is to make liaison with similar groups of research people in Taiwan, in Hong Kong, and Southeast Asia. There are many, as well as other parts of the world, we hope, other research institutes that have interest in China in the project. We would like to seek cooperation and mutual assistance with each other. So that is a very important task. It's not only national, but also international project.
Yes, I think, yeah, please.
You mentioned there were a few common problems in changing an economy from a central to a diversified one. Among them, high inflation, the concern that monies pumped into the economies for reform might end up in private hands, and controlling the flow of merchandise and manufactured goods. Those appear to be problems that are not applicable to individuals within the affected countries. Are there specific things that individuals within China will be facing that are problems or challenges at this point during this move to a diversified economy? It's a broad question, but if there are specifics.
Yeah, it is a very important question. The question has to do with what economic reform can bring about the benefits to individuals, as well as the risks such as inflation, overspending, and all that. I think it's fair to say, looking over the last 10 years of economic reform in China, the individual households have benefited tremendously. Anybody who has visited China in the last 10 years will not fail to see the improvement in the living standard. 10 years ago when I visited China, China was very backward, very poor. And I visited China 2 years ago, and as well as in 1984. Each time I visit, the tremendous improvement. So it tells us very clearly, economic reform brings out great benefits to the common people in China. And I think that this general principle can be applied to other countries in the world that undertaking economic reform, whether these are socialist countries or not. But at the same time, as you correctly pointed out, when economic reform releases very large amounts of purchasing power, money, into the hands of the households, not only the households, but also businesses. They engage in investment in an uncontrolled way, no mechanism to check and balance their spending, and households receiving bonuses and the increases in wage income, they go out, consume in an unchecked way. That the result is inflation. And that inflation problem has plagued China, as well as in many other countries, whether socialist or market economies. In Latin America, we see the same problem. So how to bring about economic reform and at the same time bring in check and balance mechanism? That question will be a central question in the Project 1990 that we will be sponsoring.
Well, if no further question, I just want to make one remark. I think this project is equally important to the United States. We in USA somehow have the problem being very short-sighted. In my recent trip to China, we see the Europeans continue to be very active, Japanese very active, and including people from Taiwan, South Korea. So we hope by emphasizing this research work, we might be able to show to the people ourselves in the United States that we must keep a long-term view. And thank you for coming forward.